Now that we have several questions in our question bank, it's time to begin creating our first quiz. To do this, go ahead and click back on your BIOL 432 link up in your breadcrumbs to go back to your main course page. Then make sure that editing is turned on and scroll down to week 15. Click the drop-down menu for Add an Activity and select Quiz. Now let's go ahead and create the shell for this quiz. To do this, let's give our quiz a name. For our quiz, we'll call this the final exam. For the introduction, we'll simply type in, "This is the final exam for this course." Go ahead and scroll down, and now let's set up the rest of the quiz. The first pair of options allow us to set the date and time that we want the quiz to be open from and to. This way, we can have a specific time limit for when students are allowed to go in and access the exam. To set these times, you would simply check the Enable button, set the date and time, and remember that the time is set in a 24-hour clock. So if you wanted to set the time for 1 o'clock in the afternoon, you'd have to set that time for 1,300 hours. For training purposes, we're going to go ahead and leave this option disabled. The next option, time limit, allows us to set how long we want our students to be able to take the exam for. So we could say 60 minutes. So once the student clicks on the exam, they have 60 minutes to complete all the questions, at which time the exam locks, and they're no longer able to continue answering questions. The next option allows us to set how many attempts we want the students to be able to make. In the case of a final exam, we would probably set this to only 1 attempt, at which point the grading method would become disabled. However, for training purposes, let's go ahead and leave this option set to unlimited. This may simulate a practice exam that you may put into your course to allow your students to go in and practice with questions that may appear on a final exam. For grading method, if you're allowing multiple attempts, you can choose how Moodle selects the final grade for that quiz, whether or not they select the highest grade of all the attempts or average out all of the grades, or Moodle can save the first or the last grade that the student made an attempt with. The next section allows us to control how the questions are presented to the student on screen. We can choose whether or not we want to control the specific order that the questions are presented in, or we can choose to have Moodle randomly shuffle the order in which all the questions are presented. This may be very helpful in a situation where you have a lot of students in one location, such as a computer lab, all taking the exam at the same time. That way, no two students would likely have the same questions come up in the same order, because they would be randomly generated by Moodle. For our training purposes, again, let's leave this set to as shown on the edit screen. The next option allows us to control how many questions appear on each page of our quiz. We can choose to have all the questions on one page. While I'm testing the quiz, I like to have every question have its own new page. The next section allows us to control the question behavior. Many of our questions, such as multiple choice questions, have many possible answers. The shuffle within questions allows us to set a single override to force Moodle to go ahead and shuffle the order that the answers are presented to every single student. I like to leave this option set to yes. Next, we're able to set how we want the feedback to be presented to the students. The default method is the deferred feedback. This means that when a student begins taking the exam, Moodle will wait until the student completes all of the questions before it begins providing feedback. And then we're able to go in and control what feedback we present to the student in a variety of different ways. That's done down in this next section. Here, we can see that during the attempt, because we have deferred feedback selected, none of the options are available to us. However, later, while the quiz is still open, we could choose to provide additional feedback to them. I like to set this so that only the attempt, meaning the answers that the student marked, are the ones that the student sees. So I like to go ahead and uncheck those options. So that way, a student would be able to get to the end of their exam and they could go back and they could review the answers that they've selected. Then, immediately after the attempt, once the student clicks the Submit button to turn the exam in, I like to go ahead and let them see their attempt, whether or not the answer was correct, and see the points that they got. I generally like to hide the specific feedback, general feedback, right answer, and overall feedback from the students when they first hand in the exam. This way, they're able to see whether or not they got the answers right, but they're not able to see all of the answers. This is very helpful if your students may be spread out over time taking the exam. That way, no student has essentially the full answer key that they could hand off to another student. Then, after the quiz is closed, and we would set the close date up here. If we wanted to set the close date to, say, maybe the 5th at 5 o'clock, we could then provide all of the feedback to all of our students once the quiz is closed. In our case, though, we're going to go ahead and leave the closing of the quiz to be not enabled. If we scroll down further, we now can control some display settings. The first option, Show the User's Picture, is quite helpful, especially if you're giving proctored exams. What this option would do is it would enable Moodle to always show the student's profile picture on screen while the student is taking the exam. This is very helpful in a proctored exam situation where the person giving the exam may not know all of your students. This way, as they're walking around the room, they can see that the person sitting in the chair matches the picture of the person on screen. In our case, we're going to go ahead and leave this option set to no. Next, we can control the number of decimal places that are applied to all of the grading, and we can control the same option for the specific questions themselves. The next section allows us to control restrictions on attempts. If you want to leave the quiz open all of the time within your course, but you know you don't want the students to begin taking the exam until they show up to class, and you want to force them to show up to class, then what I like to do is I like to go ahead and enter in a password, such as 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's a very simple password, very easy to remember. Then when the students come into class, I can tell them, okay, go ahead and click on the exam and give them the password at that point. Then they're able to begin taking the exam. They won't be able to begin taking it, though, if they don't show up to class and have that password. For our training purposes, I'm going to go ahead and leave the password blank to simplify things. The next option, Require Network Address, is very handy if you work with your IT department to come up with a network range of IP addresses for a particular set of computers, such as in your computer lab. You can enter that network range in here, and then Moodle will only provide the exam to those specific computers. That way, a student can't go into any computer lab or use their own computer to then access the quiz. You can control the environment in which they're taking their exam if you so choose. The next set of options allow you to control a delay between multiple attempts. So if a student comes in and they take the exam and they go through all of the answers, then you can set a delay of, say, 60 minutes that they have to wait before Moodle will re-administer the exam to them. This can be very helpful so that the student doesn't automatically remember all of the answers that they just made and they go in and just change their answers. I'm going to go ahead and leave this disabled for now. The next section down here allows you to provide some overall feedback, and this is based on grade boundaries. So for instance, if a student gets 100%, we can give them the feedback of great job. We'll go ahead and leave the rest of the boundaries blank. Go ahead and scroll down now, and now we have our common module settings. If we wanted to set our exam to target groups, we could do that here. We're going to go ahead and leave this set to no groups because we want every student in our class to be able to take the exam. We also want the exam to be shown to them. We can then click the button for Save and Return to Course. We'll click the Move Right button to tab in our final exam underneath of our final research paper and align with everything else on our page. Now, let's go into our exam by clicking the link for Final Exam. When you go into the exam, you're given just the instructions as to what the exam is. You're shown that there's going to be a time limit and what the grading method is. Now, as an instructor, we need to actually go in and set up the exam by clicking the Edit Quiz button, and we'll do that in the next movie.